When we talk about Freud, people might roll their eyes or make a joke about mothers. And fair enough, he certainly got many things wrong. But we also ignore him because he became too successful. You see, his ideas are so deeply embedded in our culture that we treat them as common sense. We forget how insane they sounded back then. Nevertheless, if we look beyond the cartoonish persona, you'll see that he gave us an incredibly useful guide to read people like a book. Let's start with the fact that there is a war inside the head no man is safe from. Freud taught us that you are not one person. You are 3 roommates living in the same skull. And the problem is that you all hate each other. And you know every irrational thing that you have ever seen in a human being is the result of this battle. Now, who are these voices? First we have the id. Id demands, not wants, but demands to get anything that it gives it pleasure without caring about the consequences. And it wants it now. When you see someone lose control through a tantrum or act on pure impulse, you are seeing that the id has taken over. The opposite voice is the superego. This is the internal critic. It is the voice of your parents and society. It will set extremely high standards for you to behave, and if you don't, you'll be met with guilt and shame. Now, caught in the middle is the ego. This is the rational part that you identify as you. The ego has the most difficult job in the world. It must satisfy the screaming id without triggering the punishing guilt of the superego. At the same time, it needs to deal with the constant distractions and the dangers of the world. When the pressure gets too high, when the id's desires become too dark, or the superego's demands become too harsh, the ego will panic. So to survive, it builds walls. These walls are known as defense mechanisms. As we said, the ego will panic when the id desires something forbidden like aggression, chaos, or promiscuity. So to keep that forbidden desire hidden, the ego doesn't just suppress it. It forces the person to act out the exact opposite behavior. To better understand it, let's see a typical example. Consider a man who is very hostile toward homosexuals. You can see it in his face and voice that he has a lot of resentment for them. Now, Freud looks at their reaction, but unlike you, he doesn't simply see a bigot. He would say that this person might secretly be struggling with unconscious sexual attraction to men. For whatever reason, his superego cannot for any moment accept those feelings. It finds them wrong and shameful. So the ego transforms that forbidden lust into a full-blown hatred. So if Freud is right, the more bigoted someone is, the more likely they are secretly queers. To give you another interesting example, people who have quit alcohol are usually the fiercest advocates against drinking. They preach the evils of alcohol to anyone who will listen. But in this specific case, it is very beneficial, right? Because when we overcome a life-threatening addiction, having disgust for it helps us resist the temptation and we are less likely to relapse. Displacement. Let's say you have a boss who humiliates you. You want to scream at him. That's the id. But you know you'll get fired. That's the ego keeping you with a roof over your head. So what you end up doing is that you swallow the anger. But here's the catch. Emotion is energy. And energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be transferred. So, what you do is that you go home and your sibling or your child hasn't done the chores, and out of the blue, you scream at them. Of course, they made a mistake, but the fury doesn't fit the crime. And why do you do it? Because that person is a safe target. It allows you to release the pent-up emotion from a danger source onto a defenseless or at least way less scary subject, in this case a person. Essentially, you treat them as a boxing bag. Next we have identification with the aggressor. Imagine a little child with a very strict or even cruel parents or teachers, and they have to deal with this shit every single day. Eventually, to protect themselves, they transform into a scary figure. You know, they internalize the aggression and start bullying other children. Because by becoming the aggressor, they no longer have to feel like the victim. Suddenly, they are the ones making the threats and causing the pain. So, when you see a bully or a tyrannical manager who enjoys tormenting others, you're not looking at a strength. You're looking at fossilized fear. They are using attacks as a shield, as a strategy, so they never have to feel small and helpless again. Projection. Have you ever had a partner accuse you of being shady when you have been nothing but loyal? Or a colleague who's adamant you are the lazy one, even though they are the one missing every deadline? This is the mechanism of projection. It happens when the id produces a desire that is too shameful for the superego to handle. For example, your partner feels attracted to a coworker. Now, if they feel secure, they will just brush it off. But if they have a rigid superego, they will feel like a bad partner simply because they are tempted. I know it sounds weird, but these people were raised with the concept of thought crime, meaning there is a thin or no difference between thinking about a sin and actually committing a sin. So the ego solves the problem by projecting that internal conflict onto you. You know, they will be jealous and even accuse you of cheating, or that is just a matter of time till you do. So in these moments, the accusation is actually a confession. Compartmentalization. This defense mechanism is really scary because it allows even good people to do terrible things and not lose any sleep over it. You know, we tend to assume that people are consistent. We think that if a man is a loving father, then he must be a kind boss. Or if a woman is a devout believer, she must be honest. But that's not necessarily true, because we are all capable of slicing our lives into completely separate soundproof boxes. This is compartmentalization. It allows you to hold the two conflicting beliefs or behaviors without allowing the mental discomfort to crash the system. For example, a ruthless CEO can cut 500 jobs without blinking, then go home and take care of a sick puppy. He is not faking ruthlessness, nor is he faking kindness. He has simply put them in different rooms in his mind, and he never opens both doors at once. To give you another, a more extreme example, Nazi concentration guards during the day committed industrial-scale murder. Then clocked out, went home, listened to music, and read bedtime stories to their children with love and affection. Again, they weren't faking the love for their children, and they weren't faking the cruelty to the prisoners. So when you see someone acting with baffling inconsistency, understand that to them, both versions of reality are true, just at different times or situations. Repetition compulsion. You've probably watched a friend break up with a toxic partner only to soon date someone almost exactly like them. Or a friend is constantly changing jobs and always happens to work for a boss who's a jerk. One of the reasons why it happens is that the id doesn't just want a pleasure, it also wants to master the past. You see, when we suffer a traumatic event, or we were greatly disappointed in childhood, we often do not move on. God no, that would make too much sense. First, we have to fix our past. So we keep recreating the same painful situation in our adult lives, hoping that this time will get a different ending. For example, consider a woman who had a cold, distant father, someone who made her feel like she had to audition for his attention, but she never got the part. You would think that she would grow up and find a romantic partner who is nice and warm and loving, right? The truth is that she finds those kinds of people boring. She's actually attracted to cold, distant men. You know, by being in a toxic relationship, she's not punishing herself. She's just trying to get a do-over. Her unconscious mind is like, if I can take this cold man and make him love me, I finally win. I finally prove that I was worth loving all along. Another interesting example is a man who grew up with a suffocating, controlling mother. She created an environment where he wasn't allowed to make a single important choice for himself. Fast forward to today, he's at work and the manager makes a totally reasonable request, yet he feels trapped and is likely to argue or sabotage the project. Why? As you have guessed, the problem is not the manager. It never was. He's fighting the ghost of his mother. He's unconsciously making every authority figure a villain so he can finally rebel and finish a fight that started 20 years ago. Sublimation, aka the alchemist. We have talked about how repressed energy usually destroys us, but sublimation is different. It is a great source of power, because it helps us channel those dangerous raw materials, you know, the lust, rage, envy, and fear, and channel it into something that is beneficial for us and for others. For example, Robert Greene used to work in Hollywood and the media. He was surrounded by manipulative, power-hungry people. But he channeled that energy to learn more about them and wrote a manual on how to survive and thrive in such cutthroat environments. Another example is Marshall Mathers. He grew up in a trailer park, bullied, beaten, and cheated. It's the kind of life that fills you with volcanic rage. Now, if he had used the displacement, he would probably have ended up in prison for assault, right? But he used sublimation. He took all the venom from his life and used it to write rhymes. So think about how you can channel your negative energy to do something creative.